Welcome to the Coming Home Well podcast, the show that educates, supports, and advocates for the veteran community. Your host, Dr. Tyler Pieron, U.S. Army retired, will bring you exciting conversations with amazing guests about resources, research, and military history, all geared to helping our warriors to come home well. Here's your host, Dr. Tyler Pieron.
Welcome to Coming Home Well. I'm your host, Tyler Pieron, and today we are talking about something that is very important, and it's a little bit different. It's a little bit of something we are trying to focus more on, which is our first responder audience. We have a lot of podcasts here in Coming Home Well that talk about first responders, but I haven't been as diligent about having people that are focused on supporting first responders on the show, and I hope to fix that today. We have the founder and director of Copline, Stephanie Seymour, a well-rounded and experienced therapist who's done a lot of things, but most importantly for our purposes, she founded Copline. And I'm not going to steal her thunder about telling you all about it, but it's a fantastic organization, and we're going to dig right into that. Thank you so much for coming on Coming Home Well.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here, truly, and appreciate your audience tuning in as well.
So let's talk about you a little bit.
So I'm Stephanie Samuels. I am a clinician. I have been practicing for about 35 years at this juncture, actually probably a little more than that, of which...
So just getting started.
Just fresh off that boat. So I've spent pretty much my entire career working with law enforcement, some firefighters, and a few members of family. I think I do a lot better with the first responder and law enforcement population than I do with the families. So I've been doing that for obviously decades. And when I was younger, had debated whether or not I wanted to become a police officer myself. I grew up in the roaring 80s in Los Angeles, where the gang detail units were huge. They had just come out. LAPD was well known. Crash at the time was their unit. I believe they still have Crash, which is their gang detail unit. Back then, it stood for California Residents Against Street Hoodlums. Now a gentler, kinder acronym for it, kind of like SWAT was originally a Special Weapons Attack Team. That is now obviously changed as well. So they've warmed and fuzzied that up too. So I ended up spending time doing ride-alongs, looking to see whether or not this was kind of something that I would be interested in doing. Kind of always been an adrenaline junkie. I don't think that thrilled my parents, but certainly thrilled me. And so I had been on a plane flying back from New York to California. I was living in California at the time and sitting next to somebody, and she was talking about, I was reading People magazine, which, as we know, is one of the top magazines in the world. If you ever want really good information, forget any of the scientific journals, just hit People. So I was now a resident expert on gangs because I had read the People magazine on gangs. So when I was reading it, this young girl sitting next to me said, she goes, do you know anything about gangs? I'm thinking to myself, I'm a resident expert. I've not completed an entire article in People magazine on gangs. Of course I know tons about gangs. Anyway, it struck up a really interesting conversation. Her boyfriend was in a gang, and I obviously didn't understand about, he wanted to get out of the gang, didn't understand about being jumped out, didn't understand any of that stuff. Anyway, ended up contacting the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, ended up riding with the sheriff's officers there, and just really became a interesting understanding of a culture that I truly knew nothing about. The power of females, the power of men, the understanding of what gangs were trying to do was a family, and that they would kill for their family. And then, spending so much time now riding, and rode with LAPD for quite a while, and understanding what that brotherhood looked like and the dichotomy between the two, and then really spending a whole lot of time with the cops and realizing that the mindset and the background many times of cops and gangs were very similar, except somebody took a right-hand turn and somebody took a left-hand turn. I had really never met a gang member that didn't want to be a cop. So it was really a very fascinating, incredible learning experience for me. In the beginning, I was nicknamed Florence Nightingale because I was a pain in the ass to ride with because, as one of the guys says, we hook them, we book them, we don't have time to counsel them. And I was young, I was in my 20s. I was like, oh no, they're just misguided youth. That changed pretty quickly. I no longer felt that they were misguided youth.
I'm sure they were when they were 11. However, after that,
I think that age has changed. I'm thinking 9 now.
yeah.
And so, that was really interesting. Ended up kind of realizing that I did not, that I didn't think that I could cut it. So I had a situation. So back in Los Angeles in the 80s, you had your street clothes guys that would typically deal with the gangs. You had your uniformed officers that did not. I was out with the sergeant at the time and ended up dealing with a gang member. And I remember getting out of the car, and I can always thank the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for teaching me what a stirpie was, because as I was signing my life away, I was signing it for my stirpies too. So I didn't know that stirpies were my heirs. I didn't have any at the time, so signing everything away. But so when I got out of the car, I remember running with the sergeant, and in California, they typically have cinder block walls. So I remember this kid, so he's running, I'm running. Please, Lord, don't ask me what I was going to do if I ever caught up to this person. Good news is I'm not built for speed, so I'm certainly a competitor, but not much more of a completer than
That's a great way to put it.
yeah. So I remember, and I had ridden with the sergeant before, and truly, platonic, nothing, just, I'm sure I was the pain in the ass that rode with him. And when gang member ends up jumping the cinder block wall, and I'll never forget, the sergeant looked at me, and the eyes are the soul. And I'm looking at this man, and he is telling me goodbye. He's telling me I love you. There is something that I have never seen. I don't mean love like this physical whatever. It is just a human being that I saw something that I hadn't seen in all the time. And I remember what he said. He said, I am paid to jump that wall, and they know it's on the other side. And I remember, and he said, you're going to have to get back up if anything happens to me. And it became very real. This has been so much fun to do on weekends, on weeknight. Like, this was great while I was getting my first master's. And I remember looking at this
It was
wall.
all fun and games until this point.
Yeah. I remember watching him go over this wall, and I remember thinking to myself, can I do that? Not physically. Can I psychologically do that?
Mm-hmm.
Changed a whole lot for me at that point. And the answer was probably no. I don't think I could. And it allowed me to really look at law enforcement and gain a level of respect and understanding that I would have never had otherwise. Ended up moving back east, ended up getting married, worked on 6th and D, Jacob Riis housing projects, more deaths on 6th and D than any place else in Manhattan at the time. And got schooled on the D. Really learned about respect, spent a lot of time in the Tombs, which is the jails back in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And
Anybody who's watched, any of those various TV shows, NYPD and all the rest, are familiar with some of the terminology. But yeah, that would be a unique experience to be there.
Yep. And it was interesting because I was the director of of programs for misguided youth, which was very entertaining. We were funded by the juvenile justice system. So these kids had all dropped out of high school, which was also really interesting. So I always used to tease people about taking the GED exam. They would say GED is,
good enough degree.
Good enough. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you something. I hold 2 masters. I'm not so sure that I would want to take the GED exam. So what had happened was that these kids have dropped out of school, but they are reading and writing at the 2nd and 3rd grade levels, and they're in high school. I mean, the truly best scenario for them is to stay in high school and to have allowed those teachers to push them through as they had done for decades. But we had some bad kids. We had a kid that was responsible for attempted murder. We had bad kids. And one of them was probably had already done time for shooting a cop, was involved in Happy Land murders, was out. And I had this, I still have it, by the way, my 1986 cabriolet convertible, little red car, because I was cool as a kid. And in my back then $400 parking space in Greenwich Village, that damn car would constantly get broken into. So I remember bitching one day, and this individual, comes in and he's watching me be pissed off, and he asked me what the problem was, and I told him, and he goes, just drive it here. I'm like, I am not an idiot. He goes, yo, man, nobody's gonna touch your shit. So there I was. I'm thinking, just throw caution to the wind. So there I am. I drive across from Greenwich Village to the Lower East Side, park it in the housing projects at Jacob Reese. Not only did that car get touched, but still to this day, I have that great pull-out radio, the archives. And I'll never forget, he walks into my office and he hands me my pull-out radio and he goes, yo, man, I can't be watching your shit all day.
Yeah.
It was an amazing thing. And I remember coming in one day, he wasn't there. This is a kid a young adult, who would come in early, very bright, would help other students with whether it was reading, whether it was math or what have you. One day he wasn't in. Said, anybody know where he is? And they said that they had heard that he had gotten arrested. So ended up calling around. He had been arrested. Ended up going down to see him, and had worked out with his attorney, seasoned alcoholic, and had worked out that he could be ROR'd back to our program. Again, he has a rap sheet the size of me. So I go into the back and I say to him, I said, just so you know, there's a plea bargain on the table. You have to plead guilty. You're ROR'd back to the program, blah, blah, blah. Could not be more thankful, right? This is great. Go up there. Judge says, how do you plead? This kid speaks English as well as I speak English. And he goes, not guilty. Well, the judge's face, the attorney's face, the district attorney, because in New York they have DAs, so assistant DA was now pretty pissed, and I was fuming. So I have my father's, when I get pissed off, like the veins in my neck stick out. So I said to the judge, I said, can I have a minute alone with this individual? And the judge said, no. The judge said, you can take one big step back, and so can he. So take a big step back, and my veins are coming out of my neck, and I'm like, you're guilty. You are fucking guilty. And I'm watching him, and I realize, man, again, the eyes of the soul. I am watching this kid. He absolutely believes that I have sold him out. And I just looked at him and I said, at some point in time, you're going to have to trust somebody. Took my big step up. Judge said, how do you plead? And when I tell you, he was inaudible. And he said, guilty. The judge said, cannot hear you. He said, I'm guilty, Your Honor. ROR back to the program. And he just looked at me. I learned more about respect. I had been raised in a respectful home, but I learned more about respect down on the D than I did anyplace else. Ended up, moving out to Jersey. Lots kind of happened with that. The program ended up getting shut down. I did a little turning of state's evidence for some funding that was a little funky, and ended up out in Jersey, and then went back to riding with cops. Now, I've done cops and convicts, right? This has kind of been my life.
The life of a social worker sometimes.
Yeah. And at the time, I wasn't even a social worker. So ended up going out and riding in the county I live in New Jersey, and started asking questions about, who deals with debriefings after you've been involved in critical incidents, untimely deaths, blah, blah, blah. And they really looked at me like I had two heads.
And the CISM features hadn't really been developed at that point.
No, but LAPD, Los Angeles had been just brilliant with being proactive and really looking at this, and really grateful that I had lived out there and saw that. So I ended up spending years kind of getting services back east. Ended up writing legislation back in New Jersey. That was my greatest learning experience, and probably some of my most painful years. Ended up writing the legislation, had trademarked for the for that legislation. Ended up getting sued for the legislation because it was the state. Ended up, yeah. If you ever want your ass to pucker, I will tell you, when your name is attached to like Stephanie Samuels versus the state of New Jersey, you're like, ooh, there we go. That's not going to help. Um, but the learning experience from that created Copline. And when I tell you that it created Copline, I understood a few things. I understood, number one, I was never ever going to have federal or state money. I knew that I was going to be a
And
not-for-profit.
there's a reason for that. Yeah, so let's just go in there real quick. There's a reason you don't accept federal and state money, because what does federal and state money come with?
A whole lot of requirements.
And strings.
That's the requirements.
Yeah.
The things are that you're going to give information that I was never comfortable giving.
Mm-hmm.
I had spent years with cops at this point. I had a pretty sizable practice, and several things had gone on in my practice. I was retiring young officers. I was retiring officers that had been involved in critical incidents, that either emotionally needed to get out of the career if I was retiring them, or physically had been injured on the job and had to leave the career. And they were taking with them a wealth of knowledge, a love for their brothers and sisters, and there was nothing that they could do.
Mm-hmm.
So creating a hotline where it would only be them that would answer those lines was the most important thing for me. And then, knowing that, when I rode with cops, I mean, this is how it went for the first couple hours. So I'd get into a police car and they would say, it'd be like, how long are you riding? And I'd be like, oh, the whole shift. Watch their face, like, you kidding
Yes,
me?
it would drop,
like,
wouldn't it?
Like 8, 10, 12 hours, particularly if it's overnight, because they're used to being able to coop. And then they're like, oh my God. So for the first 4 hours, they figured that either IA put me there, or the chief put me there. By hour 5, they realized nobody had vetted me. Between my mouth and they're like, there's no way that anybody knows what the hell this woman is about. So I ended up, all the pieces that needed to fall into place. So after I surrendered, cop to cop, there was a tremendous mission drift, tons of federal funds that are there. Confidentiality was not going to be ensured. That people are paid to answer those lines is a very different, than what I had thought. And remember, I mean, and I knew horrible stuff was being said about me, that it was money hungry. It was just a horrendous period of time in my life. And so the attorneys that I had a baby at the time, I had a 2-year-old, and was pregnant with my second one. So this was not, money was definitely an issue. And so my attorney, I had been able to pay, as we went along, and finally the attorney said, we need a retainer. The retainer is going to be $50,000. This is 20 years ago. And I will tell you that we're never getting out of the chute at $50,000. They have hired outside counsel to go after you. So they're going to paper us to death. So you've got to make a decision. They owed me money for the trademarks. They would owe me money for me working for them. So I said, okay, $10,000. The attorney goes, I don't think you understand. They are willing to pay you. I said, no, I don't think you understand. At some point in time, somebody's going to pull this. And if I walked away with $100,000 or more or anything, they're going to say, they're right. She did this for the money. I said, I'm going to tell you what, the only thing that I will not accept is you may not put in a do not compete clause. And the attorney was just flabbergasted. And the attorney said, I will make you a deal. if you do this, this firm will represent you pro bono.
There you go.
To this day, that law firm still represents me pro bono.
Oh, that's wonderful. So you had cop to cop and all these changes, and now you have Copline, the
Absolutely.
natural evolution. So let's talk about Copline.
Yep.
What is it?
So Copline is a hotline. Actually, it's an international hotline that is answered by retired, vetted, trained, retired law enforcement officers. The reason why everybody had to be retired is because of that confidentiality piece that I talked about. So Copline is the only hotline that I know of, certainly that for law enforcement and their families. I think that's very important for your audience to know that, because so often family members see the issues with their spouses or their loved ones before their loved ones do.
Well, they see them. Everybody sees it at the same time, but being able to recognize it in yourself is always a whole different thing.
Yep. So making sure that that there is a safe place for them to reach out. So there are three reasons why Copline will breach confidentiality. If the person is homicidal, if the person is engaged in child abuse or elder abuse, we do not breach for suicide. We had a really interesting call that came from, we obviously know where it came from because the person identified where they came from, Midwest town, and person calls us, and so we'll tell you the story, and obviously we know the story because of what happened. They called the Veterans Hotline. Person, like many officers, have the dual career, called the Veterans Hotline. Veterans Hotline breached confidentiality. Officer was, had the dual career, was living in the area that he worked, that he patrolled. His lieutenant then shows up at his house, calls him up and says, "I need to see you outside." The officer is fuming because he knows that the VA had, called on him. Lieutenant, and the officer says he wasn't coming out. The lieutenant said, "I need for you to look outside." He says, "I don't have my gun belt on. I have nothing. I just want to hand you something." Goes outside, meets him, gives him a Copline card and says, "Call them. They won't call us." And that's literally the story that he tells our listener.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so that's how we know the story.
And that's very unusual for most places you call for emergency services. If you're homicidal, suicidal, or child abuse, they're mandated reporters. They don't really have a choice. That's the stipulations that they have with the rules and the funding. So Copline's different in that, and if you're feeling a little suicidal or thinking of harming yourself, that's not going to be a mandated reporter incident.
No,
that's a big change.
The other three are mandated, but that is not. And you know what? I've never spoken to a cop that wasn't totally okay. That the mandates are on child abuse, elder abuse, or you're going to kill somebody else. Like that is just like, that's fine. But to be able to have your worst day without losing your gun badge and patch is so important. And we know, statistically speaking, that people that call hotlines don't die by suicide.
They're reaching out for help, and they're asking for help, but not at their expense of ruining everything. Correct. That they're having a bad day.
Yeah, absolutely. The training is really pretty rigorous. Not everybody, and we love the retired officers with that amazing servant's heart, and truly, I think almost every officer has that servant's heart. It doesn't mean that they're going to be good at active listening.
That's true. They're very type A. That's sort of the opposite of active listening.
But they're so used to. So I talk about when I vet, because I do the initial vetting, and I say that there are three reasons why people don't make it through our training. The top three are: number one, they end up self-excluding, that they realize into day two that this is far more emotionally taxing than they had thought it was going to be. The role plays hit too close to home, and they do not want to relive their worst day. So they end up leaving. And the other two is they can't give up their two favorite vices of giving advice and judging. And if you can't do those two, you also don't end up on the lines. So, and that's really hard because we don't have the money to pay for people to come. So we literally do 2 or 3 trainings a year. It is, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. And all these volunteers are paying their own way to be there for a week. It is costly.
Then they
And
figure out, whoa, this may not be for me.
yep, or that they don't make it through. That we end up telling them that this is just not a good fit. It does not mean that they are not, a great person with incredible skills. It's just not the skills that we need to answer these.
Mhm.
So so that's been pretty amazing. The training cadre is large, dedicated. Um, I've never been part of an organization that is so pure. I always tell people this is the purest thing I do. I'm really hoping that St. Peter is looking at this big time. There's a whole lot of other stuff that we're going up against, and that abacus when it's starting to flip.
So
So,
let me ask you a quick question. Why would someone call Copline?
mm. Honestly, anything from a bad day to a full-blown mental health crisis. So administrative issues, um,
Getting
change.
suspended. I
Yes,
think every officer, myself included, has been on rest time for something, even if you did nothing wrong. You
correct.
did everything right while they investigate to make sure you did nothing wrong. But it's still a stressful event, even if you know you did nothing wrong.
And then add to that kind of the change in the societal shift that we've seen since 2020. And um, that, I remember getting calls and lots of interviews during COVID saying, and don't forget, so COVID hit, and then you had George Floyd within inside of months of that.
Hmm.
And so I got, lots of, interviews saying, what was the uptick in Copline after COVID? So interestingly enough, I will tell you that there wasn't an uptick. Again, I don't take federal and state money, so I don't need to BS my numbers.
Yeah.
So the answer is there wasn't an uptick in calls.
They're
What
probably
there
down since, like most of them weren't even doing, speeding or any other, voluntary interactions.
I mean, the call volume didn't change. The intensity of the call did.
Hmm.
Lots of fear, lots of concerns that they were going to bring something home to their families and that kind of stuff. So that was there. But where the uptick came from, and I talked about this a lot, is that cops took the job knowing that they were going to fight the invisible enemy. Whether that enemy was a pandemic called COVID, whether it was a bad guy that was hiding in a building, they took the job knowing that they were going to fight an invisible enemy. They did not take the job believing that they were going to become the enemy.
Hmm.
And when George Floyd, when that hit, they became the enemy. And that I cannot tell you how that shifted this country. And that I did have my finger on the pulse for was seeing the calls and what they were talking about. It still to today, it is still affecting law enforcement of, do I want to do this?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
a societal shift of, do I put my life on the line for people that really don't care?
Or hate me, actively hate me for doing what they hired me to do.
Yep.
Oh, absolutely. I'm very much on the pulse on the finger of all the hiring actions, and it's a great topic of discussion amongst police officers, especially with those with long experience going, nobody's showing up anymore. You used to have 1,500 applications for 10 openings. Now you're lucky if you get 75, and a third of them are convicted felons. And that's literally the change in who's applying, and the quality goes down, and then you have more incidents, and it's a self-fulfilling issue. Yeah, so it definitely has changed the tone and tenor of how
Yep.
policing has occurred in America.
So I'd say 95% of the calls I define as bad day calls, societal
Hmm.
shift, relationship issues. That is also very big. 3.5% of those calls, 3.5% are officers that have been involved in a critical incident, not necessarily in the last 24 to 96 hours. It could be years ago when something triggered them.
Oh, yeah.
A child-related incident where they had no kids and now a child was born and they're going back, their child is now 5. They remember the 5-year-old that that they ended up doing CPR on or what have you. So that's the other. And then the other 1 to 1.5% are, the ones I always say that, they're going to make everybody's ass pucker. They are the officer that's crying, intoxicated with a firearm. And our volunteers are trained to deal with anything from that bad day to that full-blown mental health crisis. And, when you're on the line, those active listening skills, people always say to me, well, how do you deal with that? So, so I'm on the phone with you, and and you tell me that I'm going to ask, you tell me that, that your wife left, that she took your kid, that you have a DUI, you're going to lose your job, like your life is over with, you have nothing to live for. And, and I'm going to acknowledge that what you just told me is absolutely devastating. And I can imagine that it does feel like you have just lost everything. And I'm going to ask you if you've thought about killing yourself. And you're going to tell me, absolutely, you've thought of killing yourself. And then I'm going to ask you where your firearm is. And in all likelihood, you're going to tell me it's on your lap. And then I'm going to acknowledge that pain. I'm going to say, what I'm hearing you tell me is that this pain is so great that you don't want to be here any longer. And I'm going to, continue to build a rapport. I'm going to ask about your kids. And then I'm going to ask you if just for this call, if you're willing to put that firearm in another room, just for the call. And, most of the time they will do that, not asking you to remove it for any amount of time, just while we're on the phone. And we also train, look, you can tell me that you put it in another room. I'm on a phone with you.
Right.
I have
You could
no
be
idea.
lying to me, but at least you're humoring me.
But the other part of it is because people then hyper focus on the weapon. It's like if they say no, they could say yes and still be having it on their lap. Like just move on. Talk about the pain. Talk about what's going on. And when I say that we don't breach confidentiality, you and I can be on the phone, and at some point I'm going to say to you, do you have a best friend? And you're going to say, Steve. I'm going to say, does Steve know what's going on? Kind of told him that, wife and I are having some issues, but he doesn't know about the drinking, blah, blah, blah. And say, what are your thoughts on calling up Steve or texting him while you and I are on the phone? And be like, it's 2:18 in the morning. I don't want to reach out to Steve. And I say, you know what? I've chosen what type of person you are, that you don't want to bother him. That's just beautiful. I'm wondering if Steve right now was thinking of killing himself and his wife had left with his kids, would you think that it was a bother if Steve reached out to you? You'd be like, of course not. So it's being able to help them, go from that telephoto lens to opening it up to a wide angle. And very common for them to text friends while they're on the phone, text spouses if it's not about spouses on the phone, and for us to wait there. We had a suicidal call. It was a 2.5-hour call with the resolution, but the caller decided that he was very close to his captain, that he was going to call his captain, tell his captain that he was suicidal and he needed to be hospitalized. Three-way called the captain. Captain and the caller had made a decision that they were going to include his best friend in this, while the captain made arrangements with a local hospital to get him in, not through the front door, to take care of what needed to be done. Disconnected with the chief, got the best friend on the line that had already been texted and kind of, dialed in. Got the best friend on the line who was an hour away. Our listener stayed on the entire time until his buddy got to that house and said to the caller, I'm with him.
That's wonderful. Yeah, it's these methodologies, they've been developed over the years of how to do this, but having that lack of, hey, this is also a snitch line. I've worked for the government most of my life since I was 17, and people don't go to the places that we have because of the consequences. I mean, there's tons of things along with the military where if you went and saw mental health, oh, your clearance gets pulled, you lose your job, all these other things. Now they've made adjustments and those are no longer automatic, but people still believe it because it still happens, even though there's rules against it. And so that's why I think that it's a real key feature of Copline.
Yep.
And so is it just cops, firefighters, paramedics? What, just
Just cops.
cops?
Just cops.
Okay, just law enforcement. Okay, so I wanted to clarify that and their families.
Yes, but having said that, should a firefighter be struggling or whatever and calls Copline, it's not like you're called the wrong number, to take care of them and then to give them, appropriate referrals for firefighters or what have you. That's really important to us as well. But it's also really important not to have a mission drift.
Yeah.
As much as I would like to open it up, I can't. And
It's different culture.
it is, and I think why Copline works is because of the way we've done it and continue to do it. And when you ask about calls, I will also tell you about 30% of our calls are third-party calls. They are spouses that call in.
Oh, that's interesting.
That,
That's higher than I would have imagined, but
Yeah.
probably, if I thought about it more in line.
And we've just had so many rewarding calls with spouses. So the other thing that I'd like to spend a little bit of time on is about 2 years ago in private practice, like I have looked at the suicide rates. You've got the military, you've got law enforcement. And no matter what we have thrown at these populations, we are not getting suicide rates down. And it is incredibly frustrating. I can't tell you how many conferences I go to, although I will tell you that I try not to be there because my mouth is it's not always great. I'm not the person that you want like going out there. I always sound like
a little too outside of the accepted norms of, oh, we're doing a great job, guys.
Yeah. I'm like like Buffy the cop slayer when I'm out there. So I'm like, I am not going to be there. Because my frustration, everybody kind of puffs up their chest and they've got this organization, they've got that organization, they're great, and this one's the best. I'm like, we all suck, guys. We all suck. We haven't touched these suicide rates, so we've got to do something different. So about 2 years ago, actually had somebody I had gone to to high school with. She went on to become a neurosurgeon. So I jokingly but truthfully say she and I never had a class together because I didn't kind of go that route. But she ended up becoming a neurosurgeon, and I was looking over something that she had out there in social media, and I saw that she was working with law enforcement. I was like, oh my God, this is great. So I contact her, and it turns out, but interesting, that she's working with law enforcement, but she's working with law enforcement dealing with domestic violence. Not the police side of domestic violence, by the way, which we really can't talk about, but when law enforcement goes into houses of individuals that are domestic violence victims and interviewing them because they have been strangled, thrown up against the walls, and that they're not always treated great because they can't remember stuff. And it really looks like they are, avoiding and protecting the abuser, which pisses a cop off, as you know, and understandably.
Oh, yeah.
But what she was training them for was to identify a concussion. And
TBI-related
correct.
Memory loss.
Correct.
Trauma-related memory loss.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I started looking at this, and then I started doing a deeper dive. And I was like, oh, God, I've missed this. So I started looking at the overlap of brain injury, what I now refer to as HIT. So head impacts and trauma, and head trauma. So I started asking my patients about their history of contact sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. 92% of all law enforcement officers played sports. Most of them are going to be contact sports. Okay. So now I'm asking my patients, who some of them, by the way, have been with me for 20 years. I've talked about many things in the 20 years, including their substance abuse, their affairs, all the acting out behavior, the impulsivity, all of that stuff, and never looked at this piece of it.
You skipped the whole Axis 1? Come on.
No, I had the Axis 1. Axis 3 is medical. So Axis 1 I was solid on. Axis 2, if they have a personality disorder, they shouldn't be with me because I have no patience for an Axis 2. And if their IQ is that low, they shouldn't be a cop. So access to should be ruled out. But no, I had all the mental health. I was spot on. They were definitely, if you have PTSD, depression, anxiety, I am the right person for you, right?
Gotcha.
I am it. But if you don't have that, I always say 3 miles down the road, $100 an hour cheaper and far more warm and fuzzy than I am.
Yeah, yeah.
So no, I was golden on that, but now all of a sudden I'm asking them about things. I knew they had a high ACEs score. So I know the profile of a cop is somebody who has grown up in crisis, does well in crisis, doesn't know how to live without crisis, issues with a father figure, significant loss early in life, history of abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, and neglect.
And that sounds just like a gang member.
So
Which you remarked on earlier about, because the old saying we used to say the difference between a jailer and an inmate is which side of the bars they're on. And that was our cop joke.
yeah, and based on some type of reality, but yes. So I knew ACEs score was going to be high, but I didn't understand some of the underlying pieces. So I have one patient of mine whose parents, when he would cry in his crib, that the way they would shut him up is they would shake the crib violently. Okay, that's where his abuse started. And it literally went from there throughout his lifetime. So I now started asking about that, but then I started asking about, I never asked when you were 6 years old. I never asked about if you had been involved in motor vehicle accidents. So one of my guys is like, oh yeah, when I was 6, because don't forget, nobody wore seatbelts back then. If you're in the back seat, have at it.
Or in the back of a station wagon where you're facing the rear.
Yeah, no, all fair game. And cool. That was the totally coolest place.
It was the best spot.
Absolutely. So that you can watch the oncoming cars hit you. So he talks about this incident where his parents were taken to the hospital and that he was taken to school. Actually, he went to the school nurse because he was throwing up, and then he was taken to the hospital. But from there, he started playing football when he was 8 years old. Played football right through high school, and it just kept going. We know defensive tactics. How many of my guys have been injured? September, we lost a Massachusetts state trooper in the police academy, first day on the job, to a brain injury while boxing in the academy. How many of our guys, and I was just doing the intake today, knew that the patient had issues. What I see is going to be what somebody sees on the outside. Had been diagnosed with intimate and explosive disorder, which I think is really interesting because it's IED. Today we just did the intake, and he's like, do you know how many of these I didn't even think about, Steph? But when it came to how many times, because he played football and he was he
Had
would,
some TBI related concussion impact. I can think back to probably 2004, and we had no research on this. Like
right.
none. Like DoD didn't do it. Nobody did it. And there's been a ton of research in the intervening 20 plus years thereabouts, and our insights have dramatically grown. I've had a number of conversations with the folks who do the brain banks and neuroscientists, and DoD has a brain bank. There's another one on the civilian side, and people are starting to like this longitudinal research into, hey, maybe all these things that we're putting people out of the military for are because of these TBIs, not because all of a sudden this great soldier all of a sudden becomes a dirtbag. Hey, maybe there was something to that. Yeah, that's a interesting field of research. So you have a friend who's I have a friend who's a neuroscientist, and you have a friend who's a neurosurgeon, and both must have turned us on to this research. So you met her in high school. You guys went on different paths. You saw something, and then what?
Ended up doing a pilot study in Texas. Texas Municipal Police Association, spoke with them and said, hey, if I'm seeing, so 87% of my practice, have a sizable private practice. 87% of them ended up going from seeing a psychiatrist to seeing a neurologist or a neuropsychologist.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm seeing that, I'm going to be seeing the norm. I don't have all that many special people in my practice. Love them, but they're not going to be law enforcement special. So go into Texas, do a pilot study. Pilot study is really interesting. So of the individuals that responded that had been confirmed to have PTSD by a mental health professional, that 93% of them had experienced 1 to 5 concussions. Understand the NFL will retire you after 3.
Mm-hmm.
And
now,
right now, and then 50% had said that they had 15 or more.
mm-hmm.
So looking at this, so in the past 6 months, so now I have to tell you what I love. I love being part of Copline. So we are the only hotline in the world that has been training our volunteers to ask questions about comorbid factors. Because what's the comorbidity of brain injury? Depression, anxiety, PTSD, irritability, sleep disorders, impulsivity, which will include substance abuse, suicidality.
And sex abuse, or sexual misconduct,
All
like
that's
affairs.
that's an impulsivity.
Yeah. And that's, but those are the things that get you breaking up with your spouse or, that kind of horrible, bad
Absolutely.
decisions.
Absolutely. So, so Copline started training 2 years ago on being able to ask callers that are calling regarding a relationship issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've got that third party caller. So we've got the spouse that's on the line and they're talking about what's going on. Or we've got the individual, the officer that's calling. And we've had to train our volunteers because this is insanity to talk to somebody who's talking about depression and thinking of killing themselves, who's in their 50s, who you now say, hey, did you play contact sports when you were a kid? So to be able to say, I know this sounds crazy, but bear with me, this is going to make sense. So in the last 6 months, I just lectured and so I wanted to look at how many calls that we have taken where we've asked about head impact and trauma that hit, what percentage it was, and it's 73% of all of our callers. And
that is the least as someone
I
who
would say,
sort of
yep.
in this space, I'm glad there's research, but it's totally tracks.
And that's going to be low. But I will tell you what the amazing part of this journey has been. The Concussion Legacy Foundation, which was founded by Chris Nowinski and Dr. Cantu, that they just did back in March last year a separate breakout website for law enforcement and other first responders. So if you go on and you Google, for anybody that's watching, Concussion Legacy Foundation, law enforcement, it will pop up. And then the Unite Brain Bank, which will be that civilian brain bank that you're going to be talking about out of Boston.
Yep.
Also changed their inclusion category to be first responders and law enforcement. So I've got a first responder, unfortunately, right now that is on hospice. Just got off the phone before I jumped on here with you guys, with the brain bank, and made arrangements because it's home hospice. They'll have to go through the funeral parlor, but they will be able to get what they need to hopefully give this family some really needed
answers, closure. Information, and knowing that they're helping to make a difference.
And closure. So,
yeah, we've done a lot with the Concussion Legacy Foundation and the military one, and I'm so bad with names, and I'm going to blame that on my TBI because I know I definitely have those. Hey, what is the name of that guy, that place? I've talked to him 100 times, and then I lose it, but then it'll come back to me. It's okay. And there's a significant body of research now, only in the last 20 years.
That's correct.
And it was very nascent. People were like, hey, we're doing these really significant hits. You see the IEDs going off, but then you have, these long-term, the boxers and the NFL players, CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. These things are all concomitant factors. And Hey, the biggest takeaway I think people should know is that there's probably a physical cause, and it's not all in your head. It's not like
For a
some
psychological.
personality disorder. It's a
Yep.
physical thing with your brain.
So Copline has cards. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, you can see that
So,
perfect.
so here's the first, and then on the back of it, we have, let's see.
Pull it back a little closer to you. There you go. A little bit more. There you go. Perfect.
So it is the overlap of PTSD and TBI where it lists out. So we go through tens of thousands of these cards. You can literally go on the Copline website, order materials, but our goal is to literally get these cards into every officer's hands from the time they're at the academy so that they start to think about this overlap
Mm-hmm.
rather than just, okay, it's PTSD. I used to have the back of it used to be symptoms of PTSD. I'm like, no, we need to get rid of those because as we continue to grow and educate, this becomes so important. Being able to give resources
Mm-hmm.
that aren't just here's the culturally competent new buzzwords, here's the culturally competent shrink that we have in your area. Here is the website to the Concussion Legacy Foundation that has a helpline that they intentionally encrypted it for the first responders to be able to fill out the information so that they can get doctors in their areas and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So incredibly exciting work. Love being able to talk to spouses about what they're seeing and helping them be able to understand. Concussion Legacy Foundation has support groups as well for people that they believe have CTE. But the other part of this, which you had mentioned, is blast exposure. So cops are duly screwed because they typically have the head impacts, and it's really important for people to understand. You might never have been diagnosed with a concussion. You might never have experienced a concussion, but those repetitive head impacts are non-concussive G-force hits to
Mm-hmm.
your brain that continuously add up. So we've got that, we've got defensive tactics, we've got all that. And now you decide, oorah, I want to go on SWAT. Flashbangs or concussion grenades. And so now you're being exposed to blast over pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And now you have the issues with astrogliosis, with another part of that same beast that CTE ends up being, with a brain that is damaged, that is creating the same issues. The shooter from Maine, there's now a documentary out on him who had killed 18 people. I mean, and his brain was donated, and they found the astrogliosis. They didn't find CTE, um, but you kind of watch this deterioration
Mm-hmm.
of him and nobody being able to kind of understand. And you stick him in mental health facilities, not understanding that in all likelihood, and was then seen because you can only see it upon autopsy. It was his brain. It was literally, they literally did this to him. And yet gets diagnosed with PTSD, gets diagnosed with depression, gets diagnosed with anxiety. We medicate, we do this. We're missing the other
The
section.
real core cause of the repeated hits to the brain. And that, I think that is the most important real takeaway is, hey, yes, there's a lot of problems and we create a lot of things, but there's a resource to reach out. But it's not just in your head. Well, it is in your head, I guess, technically, but not just psychologically. Yeah, that's it's been fascinating to follow the research. I've been following it for years, simply because it explains a lot. And I think most people that go in psychology go in honestly to figure themselves out. And
Okay.
so, learning out some of that research and looking at it, I'm not in psychology, but I love doing the research. The main thing people need to know about Copline is, hey, what is the number? How do people get in touch with you?
1-800 Copline.
That's
So
an
it's
easy one to remember, folks.
1-800-267-5463, but it's 1-800 Copline. They can go on our website at www.copline.org. You can access Copline through there. You can access all the materials, which is free. There's a separate section that just says materials. Hit it. We can get materials to anybody all over the world. Those that are military police, available to them, their spouses as well. So no matter where they are stationed, you're never alone.
And folks, Copline, the website is fantastic. There's a lot of resources, a lot of links. They're going to find the information you're looking for, but the number, again, is 1-800-Copline. And we'll put it all in the show notes and on the social media and stuff. So if you're out driving, you don't have to write it down right now. But if you know a cop or a family member of a cop, or you're a police officer yourself, hey, there are resources out there that won't snitch on you if you're having a bad day. And I think if nothing else, you hear that part. I think that is an important part to take away is, hey, you can have a bad day and they're not going to be calling saying, hey, you need to send an ambulance. You need to call their chief. You need to take their badge and gun, because that just sort of pours fuel on the fire sometimes.
We have no idea who they are or where they're located. So truly, truly confidential.
When I was a young special agent, we had a statement of no poly, no waiver, no statement if you were ever questioned about anything. And the reason being is, we realized that if you talk, you can have in trouble. But on the flip side, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. And so you can't turn over records that don't exist. And so that was one of the other things.
So I will share with you, people have asked why we don't do texting. And Copline was set up for texting. It's because of the Fourth Amendment, because officer cell phones get taken.
Mm-hmm.
And we were going to make sure that we protected officers to the best of our knowledge and ability. And I am proud that we continue to do that.
Yeah, they can see who they called, but they can't see what was said. Those are two different things.
Absolutely. Vetting for fellow officers. Absolutely. Yes, indeed.
So I know I've asked you a bunch of questions, and we've gone a width and breadth of what Copline is, how you got it started, how you've been there, which I find personally fascinating, folks. If you want to go more in depth, and I know we have been going pretty in depth, they go on the Copline and read about how it was founded. I was fascinated. It's a great engaging story, and it's written really well. And so if you're like me, you want to know what's going on with the group and an organization, they really have it down. Stephanie, I've asked you a lot of questions. What should I have asked you about, but I haven't?
There is nothing that I can think of. I wanted to make sure that we covered the stuff on concussions, and the state funds, state and federal funds, and the confidentiality. No, I appreciate it. I think you've done a great breadth and depth job of covering Copline.
So let me ask you one last question now that I thought of it. How do you get your funding, and who donates?
So Motorola has been wonderful. We've got a Motorola grant that helps us with our training every year. And otherwise, we do 3 fundraisers. We do a 5K midnight run for the call that's been done on New Year's Eve at midnight. It's done virtually and in person at Point Pleasant Beach in New Jersey. I think there's going to be a coup this year. They've asked me to change it to 10 a.m. on New Year's Day. So. And we have a golf tournament in Texas every year, and a Top Gun shoot that has been in Texas. We had a single amazing donor a couple of years back who gave us an incredible donation. We are incredibly fiscally conservative and responsible. That money remains in an account, and we subsidize with the interest off of that. We do not run on a whole lot of money. I always encourage people before they donate, look at somebody's 990 forms. That tells you who's getting paid what and where the money goes to. And really every dime goes into materials, going to conferences, and then the trainings that we pay our lead trainer and some of the training cadre to be there. But otherwise it's all there.
That's the important part, folks. If you're so interested, go get in touch with them and go donate. But at the same time, if you're law enforcement, you should probably have this number sort of memorized, because you will, I guarantee it, encounter someone in your career that might be your best friend, might be a guy just on the squad. Somebody in your office is going to be having a bad day or worse. And here's a resource that is out there that is going to be able to help them. But at the same time, not ruin them. And that's sometimes a concern that police officers or people with clearances and things like that often have because they're worried. I mean, yes, you should always go out and reach out, and the VA's been really great, but at the same time, they are going to take action if that mandated reporting criteria is met. I mean, they have to. And so this is an alternative, which is much better about, hey, I'm having a bad day, but they're not going to, if you're not hurting somebody else, then you're pretty much in the clear as far as, mandated reporting. So that's a big distinction. I think is something that really needs to be foot stomped, as we say. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us on Coming Home Well, but more importantly, thank you for all the things that are you doing for the law enforcement community. It's a tremendous service, and I feel better knowing it's out there.
Thank you. Truly my honor to be able to do that.
Thanks for joining us this week on Coming Home Well with Dr. Tyler Pieron. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. Thanks again. And until all are home and all are well, this is Coming Home Well.